Welcome to the Emergency Management and Preparedness Inclusion of Persons with Disabilities webinar series. I'm Lewis Krause from the Pacific ADA Center, your moderator for this series. This series of webinars is brought to you by the Pacific ADA Center on behalf of the ADA National Network. The ADA National Network is made up of 10 regional centers that are federally funded to provide training, technical assistance, and other information as needed on the Americans with Disabilities Act. You can reach your regional ADA center by dialing 1-800-949-4232. Real-time captioning is provided for this webinar. All right. The caption screen can be accessed by choosing the CC icon in the meeting control toolbar at the bottom of your screen. To toggle that meeting control toolbar permanently on, press the Alt key and press it again if you need. As always in our sessions, only the speakers will have audio. If you do not have sound capabilities on your computer, prefer to listen by phone, you can dial 1-669-900-9128 or 1-646-558-8656 and use the webinar ID of 155-545-130. I also want to note to you that this webinar is being recorded and will be able to be accessed at the adapresentations.org website in the archive section of the emergency area next week. This is the 7th year of this webinar series, which shares issues and promising practices in emergency management, inclusive of people with disabilities and others with access and functional needs. The series topics cover emergency preparedness and disaster response, recovery and mitigation, as well as accessibility and reasonable accommodation issues under the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, the Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, the ADA, and other relevant laws. Upcoming sessions are available at adapresentations.org under the Schedule tab in the Emergency Management section. These monthly webinars occur on the second Thursday of the month at 2:30 Eastern, 1:30 Central, 12:30 Mountain, and 11:30 a.m. Pacific Time. By being here, you are on the list to receive notices for future webinars in this series. Those notices go out 2 weeks before the next webinar and open that webinar to its registration. You can follow along on the webinar platform with the slides. If you are not using the webinar platform, you can download a copy of today's PowerPoint presentation at the adapresentations.org webpage and go into the Schedule section. At the conclusion of today's presentation, there will be an opportunity for everyone to ask questions. You may submit your questions using the chat area within the webinar platform, and the speakers and I will address them at the end of the session. So feel free to submit them as they come to your mind during the presentation. To submit those questions, you type them into the chat text box area as shown on the screen. If you are using keystrokes, use Alt-H and enter your text. If you are listening by phone and not logged into the webinar, you can ask your questions by emailing them to adatech@adapacific.org. That's adatech@adapacific.org. If you experience any technical difficulties during the webinar, you can send a private chat message to the host by typing that in the chat window. And you can use your keyboards, Alt-H, to access the chat box to type in your comments. You can also tell us about any technical assistance problems at adatech@adapacific.org, or you can call us at 510-285-5600. Today's ADA National Network Learning Session is titled Listos, California Emergency Preparedness Campaign, an innovative community-based approach to disaster preparedness. This webinar will highlight the efforts of this groundbreaking $50 million approach to whole community preparedness. We will discuss how centering the community first preparedness efforts are more accessible, relevant, and effective to target populations. The presentation will demonstrate both the necessity of preparing our most vulnerable and diverse communities, as well as methods to do so. And our speakers will discuss specific strategies, including market research, expert input, data analysis, and community insight that guided this initiative to success. Today's speakers are Karen Baker. Karen is a nationally recognized leader, strategist, and community problem solver who currently works to address California's most pressing issues by leveraging service, partnerships, and innovative program design. She has held cabinet posts under 3 governors, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jerry Brown, and Gavin Newsom, and she has built efforts that continue to show great impact to this day. She has been tapped by Governor Newsom as the architect and co-chair of Listos, California, a campaign that focuses on building an effort that is people-centered and ensures our most vulnerable and diverse Californians are prepared. Karen also serves as a senior advisor in the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. Justin Knighton is a public affairs and communications strategist, storyteller, and advocate who works to advance equity, inclusion, and human rights. Justin was appointed in 2019 by Governor Gavin Newsom to serve as an Assistant Deputy Director in the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services and as co-chair of Listos campaign, Listos California campaign. Justin recently joined the National Advisory Council of the new Next Gen Chamber of Commerce and previously served as Vice President of the Sacramento-based public affairs firm, Global Affairs Director of the Harvey Milk Foundation, and in the Office of the Secretary at the California Environmental Protection Agency. So Karen and Justin, I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you so much, Louis. We are incredibly honored to be featured on this very important day to really highlight and hopefully answer any questions you might have about this unique campaign, Listos California, which was a real passion of our governor and the legislature to really ensure that we're very intentional with making sure that we educate everyone in the community, whether they're a person with disabilities, whether they're an older Californian, whether a non-English speaker, whether they're a person in poverty. Many of these populations are the folks that are often not intentionally educated about preparedness and often have very special needs that need to be addressed in making sure that they're prepared appropriately. So we're just so thrilled to have been a part of both designing and implementing with partners such as the Public Health Institute, and Louis is one of our strong partners out there. And look forward to just sharing this design with you and answering any questions you might have. Any opening remarks from you, Mr. Justin?
Hi, thanks Karen, and thank you, Louis. Just wanted to echo how grateful we are. I mean, this campaign has only been successful because of our partners, about 300 across the state who are in their own right really leaders in their fields and have the credibility and the experience in working with so many different critical communities to make sure that we're designing every document, every graphic, every message in a way that is community driven. And Lewis from the get, just a shout out there, because when the second I met him, he came up to me and said, I'm gonna always tell you when something needs to be better and better reflect what community needs. And since that moment, I was like, this is the guy. This is the guy who's gonna be a huge help, and he has been, and it's been so welcomed. And he's been such a coach and support system in this space to make sure that everything we do reflects what community needs to see, to access information, to understand it, and to be able to have a campaign that really responds to what communities need to see take shape, and what's needed to really make a difference. So just grateful for Lewis and his team, Public Health Institute, and grateful to be here. Next slide. So this is just an overview of the conversation we'll have with you all to really help immerse folks across the state and around the country who are joining us this morning or this afternoon for this call, to really help ground you in what this campaign looks like. You know, as we are both in the peak of wildfire season and hurricane season in the U.S., we really find it critical to have a space during National Preparedness Month, which is in September now, to kind of share our best practices and lessons learned as communities grapple with what does it mean to be resilient and get prepared. And so this is an overview of the conversation we'll have today to really ground all of you in the work we've done to hopefully inspire new strategies in other parts of the country.
Next page. I think we've already introduced her. Karen Baker, hi, it's good to meet you all.
Next page.
Well, this all just started. This kind of gives us a little background on how Listos California really began. Listos is Spanish for the word ready. And what this effort really began with is the governor and state lawmakers really deciding through urgency legislation, AB 72, to really set aside $50 million to really create a preparedness campaign that would really reach, at least at minimum, 1 million vulnerable Californians. With a population of 40 million, this was a real significant goal to really kind of go out there and find often the hard to reach and people that often weren't in touch with their emergency management offices, to really make sure that they had this kind of person-to-person educational moment and could really get prepared. That was the whole goal out of the chute.
Next slide. So our campaign goals, you know, the first and foremost, the number one goal has always been to engage at least 1 million diverse, vulnerable Californians. And when we say the word vulnerable, we don't mean lesser than. It's, you know, kind of policy speak for communities that need additional resources and support and authentic engagement. And so this helps to really be our guiding principle, so that, you know, yes, our resources and materials are for all, but this campaign was designed for communities that have not traditionally been part of preparedness activities or you know, outreach efforts before, or at least were secondary, not the top focus. And so we really wanted to make sure that we were connected to at least 1 million Californians with culturally competent and accessible information for many of these communities for the very first time. Also, you know, all $50 million of this campaign were established as local assistance dollars in legislation, so that they were every single dollar of this campaign has been invested back into community, and really helping to support a network of trusted messengers, people that have the credibility and the experience, some decades long, with community, to help deliver preparedness information in a new way. And then really our last goal being to help advance this, what we call preparedness movement. When you think about movements, you think about, you know, language that's used to capture goal, right? For us, it's getting people prepared. You think about the the language that you use. We really make sure that the language we're using is very approachable and simple and straightforward, and really using images and stories and art to help shape what preparedness needs to look like more and more in our communities. So helping to advance what we call a culture of preparedness in California. Karen?
Yeah, one other just quick comment I'll make, and we'll go into this perhaps a little bit more in detail. Part of that was just a recognition that disaster preparedness needed to be presented in a much more empowering way instead of in a way that was scary. We'll be talking later about some of our data and research that helped us really reach conclusions that really informed that strategy. We'll get to that in a bit, but I just wanted to add that now. Next page. This is our governor's quote, which is, "We're leveraging the power of people while ensuring preparedness, support, and information is not only limited to those who have been privileged enough to access, understand, and afford it." That is just, in our view, putting it out as plainly as possible, which is preparedness information has often gone to the privileged, not to everyone. And we really needed to address it with this campaign. So with that, we'll just go to the next slide.
Here's a quick video. We call it our anthem, that really represents like other successful movements and campaigns, our rally cry, kind of who we are, what we're about, and what we're aiming to achieve. So if we could push play, that'd be great.
A disaster can destroy anything in its path, except our will to survive.
This is California, where our neighbors are our family.
They have our backs, and we have theirs.
Our friends, our family, our community.
We can all take small steps to stay safe.
Because knowledge is the best shelter from any storm.
And no matter where we live,
how old or young we are,
or what language we speak,
no matter how others may see us,
we're calling all people to connect, protect, and prepare.
And we're not done until all Californians know what to do by staying informed.
So we know what's coming and what we can do about it.
Until all Californians know how to connect with the people we care about and protect them.
Until all Californians get to safety if we need to and know what to bring and where to go.
Or stay at home until it is safe to go out.
Before the earth starts to shake, wildfire sparks and waters rise high.
Get friends and neighbors to prepare.
Because we're in this together.
This is California.
Thank you so much. And you'll see and you'll notice that in a disaster campaign, which is typically overcome with images of fire and destruction and death, we're not using any of those images. And we're actually changing the channel for what we're communicating. Hopeful, people, community, all of us in the community getting prepared together with steps that are very tangible and simple and free. And this was a very specific decision we made based on data that we'll go over later in the presentation. Karen?
That's great. Next slide. So these were the principles that really guided our approach. You know, we always put people at the center. That's number one. And really a kind of a bottom-up approach to preparedness, grassroots instead of grass tops. Materials and events, we really wanted to make them accessible in all senses, right? With both people that had diverse abilities, different languages, cultures, and different understandings. And that therefore even literacy levels were really important, that we made it truly accessible to people that may have a lower literacy level. So a lot of strong graphics. Initiatives are focused on building whole community resiliency. That really is what the whole approach was really guided by. We really want to build out that community resiliency. Justin?
I'll also add that, you'll notice here that what we are also inherently captures what we're not. This is not a campaign that is meant to solve all problems and challenges in the disaster space as it relates to response and recovery. This is specifically about preparedness and educating community. So this was a decision that we made because of the resources that we were given, how it was defined, and really looking at preparedness and delivering information and really helping to advance some behavioral shifts in culture, knowing that there are still many gaps and barriers and challenges that exist for many communities in this arena. This is a campaign designed specifically for communications, outreach, and information. And you'll notice if you go to our social media platforms that are all listed as Listos California, we've released today, and we will throughout the day, many new content and videos where we have different artists who communicate in ASL, doing video, communicating the 5 steps. We also have, as part of a community-centered approach, really found that we needed to create space for community and people to even articulate what barriers are and how they feel about preparedness. And so we've released a variety of videos highlighting the voices of Black Californians, Latinx folk, our friends in the API community. And then today we're releasing a video with folks with disabilities to be able to articulate and communicate some of those barriers, because we can't solve problems until we know what those problems are. So really using a communications approach to all of our work. Next slide. So our approach, really looking at the programmatic pieces. I'll touch on this briefly. This is really Karen's mastermind, but really getting resources back out in the community with various partners, CBO, partners kind of being our main anchor, of which Lewis and Public Health Institute is taking many of the markets in this space and leading our work on the front lines of many communities, but also service and volunteer teams from CERT, Community Emergency Response Teams is what that represents, AmeriCorps, and a variety of other key partners. But Karen, please jump in here.
Certainly. So those community-based organizations were organizations that felt that they had the ability to be able to either subgrant within their community or lead an effort county-wide. So it was kind of different for every applicant. Most of them chose to subgrant at least some of their funds. And the funds would range anywhere from maybe $500,000 to over $2 million given to a given county. And what they would then do is identify, wow, within, let's say I'm in Alameda County and I know 25%, I'm making this up, 25% of my county are people with disabilities, 20% are older. We've got non-English speakers that are 35% and 50% are non-white Hispanic. And what we really want to be able to do is be intentional about also reaching some Native communities and some immigrants that we know are working in a section of our county. What they would then do is take the funds that they received and the strategies that we'd be providing them and strategies they came up with locally, and then they would distribute those funds in subgrants so that the person that was being touched on the ground and being educated would have usually a very close relationship to a local nonprofit. That's why that's that local subgrantee that would be in touch with them and doing that outreach and securing, if you will, an engagement, a record that, yes, I had a training moment with a person in my community and I have then, registered that. And that's been our goal, is to be very intentional about like spreading it out and making sure that those funds get as close to the ground to the individual that needs to be trained. The service and volunteer teams that were also a part of this included CERT, Community Emergency Response Teams, also included AmeriCorps, for those of you that are familiar with that national service program. So we had a lot of different partners that had different relationships within a county and that were part of the whole strategy of reaching everyone, as many people as we possibly could. And we'll go to the next slide. I'm going to have Justin handle this, if you don't mind.
Thank you. So really our communications approach was to, as mentioned before, change the narrative around what disaster preparedness has always been, both in the communications of the steps and the information we provide the public, but also in the messengers that are delivering the message, right? Our network of partners statewide. And you'll see that our resources and information really help invoke positive responses, right? Community, family, this idea of togetherness, of inclusion, of elevating the unique challenges and priorities of community. We've also found in this work during a global pandemic that in doing work with populations that are often marginalized, kind of shut out, put out, not included. These are communities, groups of people that, you all know this, are just trying to manage day to day to survive, right? Trying to manage day to day to exist and kind of make it through. So if we are presenting information that will help folks survive and be resilient in the face of a catastrophic disaster like a wildfire or a pandemic, it ultimately seems like a burden, and data that we'll go through, basically showcases that. It's a burden, it's overwhelming, and it can seem as an add-on, is not a priority. And so what we have learned through data, but also just existing through this campaign this year, is that if we're delivering preparedness information through a vacuum, it doesn't work. We have to deliver preparedness information through the lens and the outreach of other priorities that people and communities care about. If they're losing their job during an economic crisis, connecting them to EDD, resources, state and local resources on, kind of employment benefits for employers and employees, housing information, renters information, public health information, things that communities see as top of mind, so that when they also experience preparedness information, it doesn't seem extra or out of nowhere. It's kind of integrated into the day-to-day requirements and needs of a community. This is also supported by integrating culture and identity of different communities in an authentic way, so that we start to have preparedness become a pull thread of what communities need day to day, and that they see themselves in preparedness. It doesn't seem as something that's added on or extra. Next slide.
Next slide.
Oh, this is materials.
Okay. Okay, sorry. I thought it was the same slide. I was like, what? There we go. So on material development. So one of the first things we did before we went out and actually started creating the material is we did some really important research and learned that, of course, people wanted to be prepared. 88% of those that we spoke to said they wanted to be prepared. It's just that they had these three challenges. They found it scary, they found it expensive, and they thought it was going to be time consuming. So when we developed our materials, we recognized, we have to make sure that this is incredibly accessible. It's got to be very graphically oriented. It's got to be not scary. We have to make as we do an inventory on current preparedness materials and do the research, we have to pull out those threads that are kind of common to all, instead of necessarily showing in some kind of demonstration of everything that we know, a big kind of dump of preparedness jargon. That's not going to help the communities that we want to reach. We really need to be selective and make it accessible. So that's how we put together the materials that we've done. And you'll see that it's accessible both visually, audio, from an audio perspective, digitally, etc. the cultures and languages that we've provided in were based on the 24 counties out of the 58 in California that competed and were selected for these funds. We looked at the non-English speakers from those communities and reached our list of 7 languages that we would go ahead and translate our materials into because they were non-English speaking households. Those were, of course, English, Spanish, Chinese, both Mandarin and Cantonese, Korean, Vietnamese, Tagalog, and Hmong. So just wanted to share that with you. Those are the languages and that we've provided our materials in. And if you can go ahead and go to the next slide.
So on the point Karen made about data, not only did we do a poll, before we did a poll to understand the barriers of community, where communities were currently thinking about doing or not about preparedness, we actually worked with a professor at Sacramento State University to integrate existing maps, hazard zone maps per county, the Governor's Office of Emergency Services already had for places that were prone to wildfire, earthquake, and flood, and overlaid that information per county with census tract data based on our vulnerability indicators of population, so that we knew, and all of our partners know and have access to, based on each county, where do, quote, diverse vulnerable communities live in zones that are at threat of wildfire, earthquake, and flood, so that we can target both a poll that we got the 88% of where Californians are, and thinking that information's scary, time consuming, and expensive. We could actually target our, focus group, phone survey, and poll in communities, but then we've been able to use that data across all outreach efforts, and where we put ads in and other key advertisements of messaging. I bring that up to say that poll was a core part of informing, simplifying steps of preparedness, but it was also used, or what we did rather, we also did an audit of preparedness information and found that there were many different types of data that existed across the country and around the state, where preparedness information was too much. It was overwhelming. It was, we're asking people to take steps like home hardening, which is my perfect example, although my friends at CAL FIRE may not agree. Home hardening is great in communities that are in places that require defensible space, right? If you're a lot of, thick brush, woods, forests, and defensible space that you can then put on your home, and have your neighbors do the same, goes a long way, and it's urgent. But if you're talking to someone who lives in an apartment building in the middle of downtown Oakland, and is working 2 jobs and has mouths to feed at home, both of kids and a parent living with them, hearing the message of home hardening already doesn't resonate and work with them. We're connecting people to information that is too much or doesn't relate. And so, we see these 5 steps, and where Listos California plays a role is, let's articulate very simple, straightforward information that people can then take, that is at little to no cost, that is quick, can be done in a couple of days, a couple of hours here and there, and incrementally over time, as the entry to preparedness steps, right? So that they can then look at all the other groups and organizations that are advocating for preparedness and not feel overwhelmed by all the steps that people can take. This doesn't go into all the insurance, all the minutia of information that exists that people can take and do, and often are overwhelmed by. We're connecting people with very straightforward, simple things so that it doesn't seem like too much. So here's a graphic that represents those 5 steps. Next slide.
This is really kind of at the center of most of our materials. This is our disaster ready guide. We have done an additional materials. This really doesn't give you much other than the cover. So I apologize. But what we encourage you to do is go to listoscalifornia.org. And while there, you'll see a toolkit that will have the disaster ready guide. And if you click on that, it will provide it in whatever language you're interested in, as well as other materials that you're going to see in that toolkit, including guides for both individuals with IDD as well as their caretakers. You're going to see a variety of materials that I think really reach a lot of our community members. Thanks, Louis, for promoting that listoscalifornia.org website, because that's where you're going to find all of these materials in a format that you can just print them off and distribute them to your community, to your family and loved ones. Next.
Research and community. So this is really where all the research that we've been mentioning kind of comes together. Monitored by Deloitte actually was the first research document that we had in this initiative, and it was a report that audited a variety of after action incident reports. So after disasters hit, there's often a after action report that assesses kind of what happened, lessons learned, and the Deloitte team. This is based on the sponsorship that Karen brokered with the James Irvine Foundation to really help do an audit of all these reports. There's about 70 of them, based on a variety of the uptick of wildfires in California over the last 10 years or so. As well as 2 focus groups, one in Northern California, one in Southern California, with groups that work in the disaster space to really help identify gaps in disaster response and recovery, but also where solutions are. And this was a critical report that helped shape what Listos California ultimately ended up becoming as part of this whole community approach to preparedness that we need desperately in times where resiliency is just as urgent as solving climate change issues. That data then led to us doing those vulnerability hazard maps that I mentioned before, where we now know where communities live based on their hazard in each county in the state. Use that data to then inform our EMC research, where we found that, as we mentioned earlier, 88% of Californians know that they need to be prepared, especially groups that are more marginalized, but they aren't prepared because they found that it's time consuming, expensive, and scary. And so this has become kind of the mission, the problem statement rather, that we're trying to solve for in all the things that we do, trying to overcome those hurdles of perception, but also systematic challenges where communities haven't been as included. And all of our information, from our logo to our various disaster guides and public health information, tip sheets, and all the materials that exist on our website, a curriculum based on your phone, but also a web-based curriculum to learn information in different ways, depending upon whether or not you have internet challenges, part of the digital divide. All of these things have been informed by an advisory team of communities that represent all the communities that we're working to serve and support, but also our partners like Public Health Institute in Alameda County, who really help kind of shepherd and guide a lot of the decision making and products that we have. So research is a core part of what we do, and we acknowledge that in being innovative and being groundbreaking and doing something that's never happened before in the country, we can go based on gut and experience, but in really helping to make sure that the naysayers and the people that are going to poke holes or try to question, we get around that significantly by using data, and we achieve our ultimate goal by getting information to people that they actually need and want and can use. And so for both purposes, both working within systems that are slow to move or that have problems moving, data becomes your tool to advance folks quicker, or at least have enough cover to make decisions that are right for people, but also to get materials into people's hands that reflect what they need. Karen?
No, I think we've covered all of this pretty thoroughly. I know there was a question in the chat about the one-on-one interviews and how we may have tapped and included people that had disabilities in those initial conversations. And all I can let you know is yes, they were part of our initial group. So it could have been everything and ranging from, and often you would have, multiple identifiers. You could have a Korean older Californian with a physical disability in a rural county. And we're looking at, information from lots of different angles there, to an LA youth that had an issue with an IDD, with an intellectual developmental disability. So, I mean, there was such an interesting mix throughout the entire one-on-one interviews, so that it could really inform the later poll that we did. So we'll go ahead and go to the next. So this is our success to date. And these numbers just keep ticking up. So as you know, our ideal was 1 million. We've reached over 11 million. So we've kind of knocked that out of the ballpark. These community-based organizations have been working so hard. The 930,000 sub number that you see there, that small number, that bullets underneath, that's the more intensive disaster preparedness. We will certainly hit 1 million in that category alone by probably mid-September. The other 10 million that were reached, we had to in March pivot to COVID-19. In the middle of this natural disaster preparedness campaign, we then allowed our CBOs to pivot to COVID because that was the type of public health emergency that was most important, for communities. And so they were allowed to spend up to 20% of their grant dollars in producing COVID-19 educational materials and getting the word out to their communities. And that's where we got that big bump of the 10.7 million. And over 30% of engagements are geared toward Californians with disabilities. And I think there was a chat question that popped up I may have missed.
So, Karen, this is Louis. We're going to take those questions at the end and read them into the captioning. So go ahead and continue on.
Justin. Yeah. Anything else, Justin?
Nope. I think you covered it. Next slide. Lessons learned. We've learned so many lessons. We continue to learn lessons, and our kind of go-to philosophy is if we're not learning every day and figuring out how to improve, we're not doing our job. So, I think, everything from the first iteration of our logo that wasn't ADA accessible, and our grateful relationship with Louis was instrumental for him to raise the red flag and say, hey, this isn't hitting the mark. And that was so essential for us to go back to the design team and have a bigger conversation about getting it up to speed and putting in place better systems of quality control and accessibility. And so from a design standpoint, as one of the first actions of this campaign, it's been all lessons learned. It's been kind of the entire approach on every resource that we've been producing ever since. I would say that in a campaign like this, that is just a test ground, we call it a pilot, right? Because it's $50 million. It's not technically dollars on the ground in every community, but it is kind of helping to chart a new course. And so, all these lessons learned really helping to be flagged and captured so that we can not only in real time make adjustments where we can, but help take those lessons learned as this effort or something like it continues in California. We now have 18 months of a campaign to point to, real world examples of where we can be better, more innovative, more reflective of community needs, and be just better. I mean, we're 2020. If we've learned nothing else, we got to be better. And so this is really something that Listos California is proud of our ability to do this. So lessons learned is all that we do. So Karen, anything else?
No, I mean, just recognizing that there were some of our CBOs, depending on who the applicant was, like you might have someone in Lewis who really understood, disabilities with a really, deep knowledge, but may not know as much about Native tribes in Alameda. I'm making this up. Maybe he does. And so there would be other community-based organizations that would be kind of very knowledgeable about that topic. So when we're talking about lessons learned, the truth is that we had to both learn about things through the lens of diversity of abilities, but also of culture, right? And different people came to the table with assistance in depth in those different areas, and that really helped create something that was very, very robust. But we can go to the next slide. So I think this is just an accessible engagement field example we wanted to share. And this came from the Berkeley Disaster Planning Neighborhood Network, and who matched volunteers with seniors and people with disabilities in Berkeley who needed help during the COVID-19 shelter-in-place order. And it was during that work that they were able to provide the disaster preparedness information. So those disaster ready guides could be handed out, and or other materials that have been produced, just so that they've got what they need. And if you go to the disaster ready guide, you'll see that there's a lot of different various subsections, not only based on different types of disasters, whether it's flood, power shutoffs, wildfires, etc., but different types of issues, people with developmental disabilities, people with speech and communication disabilities, with mobility and other physical disabilities, people with transportation challenges. There's all kinds of subsets that are really addressed in the disaster ready guide. So whenever we say that we've distributed disaster preparedness information, it does include this kind of most basic piece. Justin?
Yeah, I will say, this example being a perfect one of a glimpse into how delivery of preparedness has taken shape in this campaign. I mean, one thing that I think has been the reality of our work, both in the architecture, but also in where we experience some challenges, really, but I think in a good way, which is the state requirement of meeting engagement totals. What do our partners need to do to reach communities, the right communities in their region, but also being able to qualify what those engagements are, right? We need to make sure that we're actually connecting to real people. We can count it, we can verify it, and we know the level of which those communities have been connected to information, right? We're not counting for the 1 million, we're not counting like website impressions, right? We're not counting excuse me, likely readership of news articles, right? We actually want to have a very stringent requirement so that we know clearly how we're being effective. The rub then becomes we're also allowing all of our partners to be very flexible in the design of their outreach, right? We're not dictating how people connect with communities. They can be as innovative and as reflective of community as they wish, within some principles, of course, and some guidelines of grant dollars, but it gives space and platform for communities to be as innovative in working with the Berkeley Disaster Planning Neighborhood Network, but also in going to Mexican consulates to help reach immigrant communities in the waiting room before COVID, while we're waiting for appointments on immigration paperwork, to hear preparedness information from a neighbor that they knew or someone like that that they're connected to. So whether it's Meals on Wheels as a delivery, healthcare systems as a delivery of preparedness, going to faith-based community gatherings of various types to get preparedness information that way, really making sure that communities are actually able to have the flexibility to drive some of these new ways of reaching the people. Next slide. And here we are at the end. What a lovely time with you all. Questions. Louis, I'll kick it back to you.
All right, thank you very much. And so all of you remember now, this is a good time to submit your questions if you haven't submitted them, and we'll be reading those off and dealing with them as they come in. So the first question that we haven't gotten to is someone asked that they loved the anthem video. Did you say that you were in the process of releasing a disability-specific video? And if I understood that correctly, when will that be ready for you?
Yeah, I'll take that one, and I try to answer it in the questions as best I could. But we have a video series by a really phenomenal young filmmaker who we call "What Happens to Us" is kind of the theme, and we have released the videos of community from the Latinx, Black, and API community, and we have a video coming out today to highlight voices of people with disabilities that will come out on our social platforms today. So exact time, not sure, but it will be today.
And that link is listed in the chat if you didn't see that. All right, next question. Do you consider how to reach people with disabilities who need or use social services or medical services related to their disability?
I want to make sure I understand the question. I think what it has to do is when we work with a local community-based organization like Public Health Institute, it will, as they are the individual that's given the grant dollars, they're the ones that come up with the strategy of how they will reach people with disabilities in their community. And they all have done it in very different ways. Sometimes they might have held like a summit of organizations, this is pre-COVID, and brought people together and done a true countywide training. Others have noted that people with disabilities might be subsets of other groups that they're educating, and then just have noted that in their engagements. So if you're talking about as far as, how we go about doing it and how they're counted, that's how we kind of go about it. I don't know if that answers the question or if you want to add something, Justin.
No, that sounds great.
And this is Lewis, and I can add a little bit as a grantee to explain that a little bit further. So when the grantees do their sub-granting to organizations, kind of the charge that we were given was to find the local community-based organizations that provide contacts in that community, whether it's services or programs or whatever. And so, the specificity of what you're asking about depends on if the grantees really deal with those kinds of people with disabilities. They may or they may not. Furthermore, people may reach out to those specific populations, but it sort of depends on how much the local community grant organizations can get there to those communities. So I think it will vary across the state. All right, next question. How are you able to obtain data on the number of people with disabilities who have COVID-19? Our community collects information about the number of people who tested positive for COVID, but has no other information about the race, nationality of the person, or disability status. How is that information gathered?
So I can address that. Basically with our numbers as it relates to COVID-19, that is straight up communication activities. So that could be anything from a billboard that you pass. It could be a piece of information, a disaster guide or a public health emergency guide that has been put in food that you have picked up at your food pantry. during COVID. And so all we've done there is a simple count. There hasn't been an understanding of what the breakdown is, and we haven't asked it of our CBOs to count and categorize who has received COVID-19 communication materials. That expectation is only put upon people who have done outreach for the disaster preparedness piece of what we do.
And I'll add that your question, I think you're also asking about, or the question's also asking about actual people who have disabilities that have been, who have COVID, like how is that being tracked? You know, that is a question for the Department of Public Health. They're really managing how to record and kind of keep tabs on all new cases and deaths of COVID-19. And so I don't have that information specifically on hand, but they're the agency of record on all things related to tracking COVID-19, cases related to COVID-19, and recording and releasing public health information, of which we use at a top line level to just understand where COVID cases are experiencing a spike and where we need to kind of double down outreach efforts and collaborative efforts with the community to help slow the spread. So if your question about that specific piece is really being driven by Department of Public Health.
All right, next question. How did you coordinate your campaign with local jurisdictions which also have materials? Did you allow grantees to make their own materials or rebrand?
Well, I'll take part of this, and Justin might chime in, and also you might chime in, Louis. What I think one of the great learnings of this campaign was certainly allowing a local community, if they wanted to make that choice, to go ahead and do unique creation of curriculum that they thought would really be important for reaching their community. The basic Listos brand had to be the same and put on everything, but other than that kind of common element, a local jurisdiction could choose to create some of their own materials, and that's curriculum, teaching materials. Everyone has created other materials for education purposes that they think will really reach and speak to their community. We have some communities, for example, that were really interested in preparing people that had a lot of pets. So up in Northern California, we have a lot of folks that were really motivated by that and created materials that had that as a focus. It really did depend on the individual. I think the only county that really went to the degree of creating a whole campaign was in fact Lewis, who was very quick and really fast out of the chute to look at these dollars and decide to create something that would be unique to the Public Health Institute. So he can certainly speak to that. As far as coordinating with jurisdictions, these funds, don't forget, went to local nonprofits. So we did not go through a county board of supervisor or through city councils or any other kind of jurisdictions or leaders from those jurisdictions, although we've educated them and provided them materials. But there was no need to do that. This was just a partnership with a state nonprofit, Valley Vision, that we had given a contract to, who was in charge of technical assistance, and their relationship with these 24 CBOs that had been contacted.
And I'll jump in, and before I would love Lewis to speak on kind of his process in designing really curriculum, that many partners have used or tapped into or promoted as part of their outreach efforts as well. That follows a very similar path as the 5 steps to Listos, California's Preparedness. And some context on that, we in an 18-month campaign were kind of pressed for time. I think if there's one kind of common theme that both us at the state level, in governor's office, and with all of our partners, is that time has never really been our friend in this campaign. That's obviously further exacerbated in a global pandemic, where it's constantly a race against time. And so we knew that in designing a whole new suite of materials and information, that we had to have the data to help inform what we did, or else it would be status quo. It would be that if we didn't have it be informed by both data and community, we would have produced something that has been produced for decades with all the groups that have never spent the time doing this type of work. And so we made the decision to allow, yes, partners across the board to either use temporarily existing curriculums that exist from American Red Cross and others, or to create their own. And that was part of our flexibility, kind of, this is a pilot campaign, let's see what works, and where we can have some learned lessons and really outstanding work be developed. And we definitely certainly got that. Definitely got also some lessons learned about the capacity and the experience of folks in designing information and branded materials, where we've had to step in and provide a little bit more assistance there. But I think well worth the outcome. And one thing I'll say about the jurisdiction piece, you know, the reality is, as many of you know, there are significant trust issues among community with anything related to government. And we knew that in a time of an uptick in disasters that we're experiencing in California, where communities that are hard to reach continue to slip through the cracks, not only on preparedness, but virtually every other issue area and challenge, from education, healthcare, et cetera, that we needed to, as part of the design of the funding, do something different and not work through the traditional systems of counties and government, but instead the messengers that have all the credibility anyway, and how to empower them in a new way to test this out. But I would love Louis to share some of his work in designing curriculum in the beginning of the campaign.
Yeah, and so I need to give you a little context, and that is that we were funded for 3 different counties, and I don't know if they told you yet, but there were 24 counties, is that right? 24 counties that were funded in California. And so we did 3 of them. One of them is sort of an urban county of Alameda, and 2 were rural mountain counties up in the Sierras that were very, very involved in wildfire planning, and were much less populous. And as part of our approach to doing this, we had an anchor independent living center in each of our counties that helped, guide the effort toward the disability community. And we all decided at the very start that we were going to work on how to make sure that the information was going to be very specifically targeted toward people with disabilities, as well as toward seniors. And so in doing so, we interviewed experts in the field, many of whom who have presented on these webinars, as well as talked to, and this coordinates with your question, some of the local jurisdictions who were working on their own preparedness efforts. So we brought in initial meetings the offices of emergency management in our counties when we brought our grantees together, so that they could all meet and we could coordinate them and they could all work together. And it was during that process where we discovered that one of the counties, happens to be Nevada County in the Sierras, had already had a mail campaign where they mailed out to every resident in the county a brochure, a booklet that involved all manner of emergency preparedness, including, and specifically for them, all sorts of fire preparedness information. So, but in part of that effort, they took on some of the general preparedness information, and we saw that, and we realized if we could take that and expand on that and then turn it back to them, that they would then be a distribution for us. So that's what we did. So we actually created, and you'll have to excuse this, but we ended up with 4 steps. The state ended up with 5. But our 4 steps were also very particularly aimed at the message that we heard from our experts, which was, we've heard all the information that you're telling us, but we need to do something with it. So help us do something. So our information has forms that you actually fill out. Once COVID hit and we couldn't hand these things out face to face, we had to transition that to online materials. So the online materials are fillable PDFs where you can fill out your, your trusted allies, which was the language of this Nevada county, but who most of us normally understand as emergency contacts. Health and medical needs. This is one that we've heard on these webinars before, are very important. And so we put a specific call out for that. Making your go bags and go boxes, and then also doing your evacuation planning. And one of the things we learned and we had to add in for our rural counties is, in some of these counties where you're hearing about these fires, for those of you who are not in California, sometimes those fires block what is your normal escape route. And so the mountain counties were really thinking to them in their planning that they needed multiple ways to get out of their house or place that they were. So we included in that process to write about their evacuation, multiple routes of evacuation. In addition to, I felt it was very important for people to understand who to listen to and who to understand when they say, it's time to evacuate. And so we connected everybody to their alert system in their county, and came up with our materials that way and started distributing that right away. So and then just to put a final bow on that, we were able to take our 4 steps then and go back to Nevada County and say, can you put this in your new version that you're going to send out to everybody? And they did. So then Nevada County actually mailed it out to every single person in Nevada County. So that was a nice way to amplify the whole message. All right, we're going to move on to the next question. We are having difficulty in getting the word out about batteries available for medical baseline customers during PSPS events. Any suggestions to help us reach more individuals who could benefit from this program? We have listed ads in local papers, spoken with community centers, reached out to several chambers, etc.
I mean, I think what we've done when we are trying to think about reaching, a variety of community members is we think of, like, first of all, different ages, and where do those different ages and stages of people go for community, because then we can hit that institution or that organization. And it looks like you've already done a really great job of trying to think through some of that. And I think it's just starting, with schools, and whether you've done thought to do partnerships there with school districts, faith-based organizations come to mind. Also getting the word out in newsletters of elected officials that might be communicating with their constituents, and you could have a little information box, or that could be placed in a newsletter, and with the hope that they could get that widely distributed. Things like that come to mind. But Justin, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, in the times of COVID, everything is both on the table, but everything's both off the table. And so what I mean by that is, I think the systems of outreach are completely new, in that the traditional ways are important, but we're not limited by those. And so I think it's kind of seeing the limitations of COVID more as an opportunity. So one thing that we did, and kind of embracing that truth, is launching a partnership with all the large major grocers in the state of California: Safeway, Raley's, Albertsons, Vons, Ralph's, as well as smaller ethnic grocery stores, to help empower those grocery chains, 2,000 in total to be specific across the state, to not only have messaging up in their stores, but to deliver preparedness information, our 5 steps, over announcements at their highest peak traffic times during the day of shoppers in store, as well as embracing, getting, our disaster guide, putting it in grocery bags as people check out, to having special trainings for their staff. I bring this up not to just promote the work that we did that we're very proud of, but to say, thinking about essential businesses, where are the places that are going to remain open and become a center for people to access medicine, money, medicine, right? All these things, groceries, right? All these things that are going to be, that are going to open regardless of, this pandemic, that you could start to forge partnerships with as outreach in community. Maybe there are a couple of grocery chains or some pharmacies or places that community is driving to and going, that you can have it be another distribution location for life-saving information.
All right, and looks like we have one last question. How is this program different from the preparedness programs conducted by the American Red Cross?
So we certainly looked at the American Red Cross program and many other nonprofit and FEMA and other state preparedness campaigns, regional campaigns, and really looked at how what was their approach. How do we want to go about it differently? All I can tell you is, the American Red Cross has, great materials. They especially have a great series for youth that's around a children's story about the pillowcase curriculum, if you've heard about that. They've got some just wonderful materials. So this is in no way saying that ours is better. It's just has a very different audience. And our audience is for these folks that we recognize need materials. We feel we all benefit from having very simple steps that aren't scary, that are going to be inexpensive, and that you can go out and immediately get yourself prepared. So I think if you look at our materials and their materials, you'll be able to see how they're different. But I think it's just the simplicity, and hopefully both will get you ready. So we in no way don't think you shouldn't be doing their program, because they've got a great one. It's just that ours is going to be really much more, I think, sensitive to culture, and culture across, all walks of life.
Yeah, I would add to that and say that it's not really a comparison of our program versus their program. I think the way to think about Listos, California, or efforts like it that hopefully start to emerge is looking at it in a linear path, right? These programs, American Red Cross, FEMA, county-driven preparedness outreach efforts, our friends and partners. We live in the Governor's Office of Emergency Services, where they do a lot of preparedness outreach. CAL FIRE, right? First responders do a lot of outreach. It's not an us versus them. I think it's, us and them and us, right? Like, those are programs. These are programs that have existed for a long time and do a lot of good work to communicate essential life-saving information that folks need to both listen to and act upon as we start to experience more and more disaster. That's without question. These programs are essential and are critical. But we also know that there are a number of communities that exist that aren't hearing it. They aren't hearing it, they aren't doing it, and it's not, and it, for many reasons, isn't connecting with them. And so our campaign is, again, the first step for many of the communities that traditional preparedness campaigns aren't working for. We kind of fit as that entry point, so that after our 5 steps or the Public Health Institute's 4 steps, groups feel confident and empowered, have the ease of mind of doing something that didn't take a lot of money or time, so that then they can react to and engage in American Red Cross and other curriculums that go deeper and provide a more thorough variety of actions to take.
All right, that's great. I just want to add that someone in the chat added to that answer by saying Red Cross typically does not address evacuation plans, although we are willing to make recommendations if asked. So that's an additional comment to that point. All right, well, we realize that many of you may still have questions for our speakers, and apologize if you did not get a chance to ask your question. Did you guys, do we have a slide with your contact information on it?
I think so.
Maybe you want to move the next slide? Nope, maybe not.
I think it was back in the beginning.
Okay, oh, it's at the beginning, okay. So if you have questions that you would like to have answered more thoroughly, you can contact, okay, why don't you guys just type them into the chat window. So Karen and Justin's contact information will be there if you'd like to ask them further questions about the Listos California campaign. You can also, of course, if you have a question that relates to the Americans with Disabilities Act about all of this, you can contact your regional ADA center at 1-800-949-4232. You will receive, let's see, hold on, we're getting a lot of, yeah, okay, good. The certificate of attendance question, if you noted that you wanted a certificate of attendance and you went through the link that we provided you, you will be getting the certificate of attendance after this. So you will receive an email link in addition to your certificate of attendance. You'll receive an email with a link to an online session evaluation. So please complete that evaluation for today's program, as we value your input and want to demonstrate the value of this to our funder. And we want to thank Karen and Justin today for sharing their time and knowledge with us. And a reminder to all of you that the session was recorded and it will be available for viewing next week at adapresentations.org in the archive section of Emergency Preparedness. Our next webinar will be October 8th, where we will be joined by Mary Casey Lockyer from the American Red Cross for a presentation on the COVID-19 issues that ARC has had to manage in this year. We hope that you will be able to join us for that. Watch for your email 2 weeks ahead of that for the announcement of the opening of registration. And thank you again, Justin, Karen, and for all of you, have a good rest of your day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.